Welcome back to the Praxis Test Prep channel. If you're new here, we're all about helping you pass your teacher certification exams with ease and confidence. If you would like to join our community of educators, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our Praxis Test Prep tips and strategies. Also, feel free to comment down below with any questions that we haven't answered yet in our video series. Today, we are covering tasks of teaching questions and specifically taking a look at how they show up on Praxis Science subject-specific exams. Praxis Science questions typically focus on your ability to demonstrate your knowledge and understanding of a specific scientific topic area. For example, if you want to teach chemistry to high school students, then you will need to know the difference between a covalent and an ionic bond. Tasks of teaching questions incorporate this knowledge, but instead focus on your ability to teach these same skills to others. In this video, I'm going to cover everything you need to know, including which science exams include tasks of teaching questions, how best to study for them, and my top 3 tips if you ever encounter a tasks of teaching question that you haven't seen before and need to make an educated guess. Ready? Let's jump in. So, first things first. Will your Praxis Science exam even include tasks of teaching questions? Now, this is a little tricky because ETS isn't always consistent with how they label these question types. In practice, we have found that nearly every single Praxis exam includes at least 2 or 3 questions that could be labeled as tasks of teaching. And so we recommend that everyone review these types of questions. Officially, however, tasks of teaching questions are a formal part of many subject-focused Praxis Science tests, including Praxis 5236 for biology, Praxis 5246 for chemistry, Praxis 5266 for physics, and Praxis 5485 for physical science. They are also a formal part of many of the broader science overview tests, including Praxis 5442 and 5436, which cover science content knowledge up to the middle school and high school level, respectively. On these exams, you can expect tasks of teaching questions to make up a minimal of 25% of the exam, or 15 or more questions, and so it is critical that you set aside at least 25% of your study time preparing for these questions specifically. All right, so we've convinced you that tasks of teaching questions are worth prioritizing during your studying. But what exactly are they? At the simplest level, these are questions that don't just ask you what you teach, but how you teach. To make this a bit more concrete, let's dive into some of the key scientific approaches and topics that tasks of teaching questions will cover. First, there are curriculum and lesson planning questions. These will focus on your ability to create an effective lesson plan that is structured, engaging, and effectively teaches the intended area and level of science. Questions in this category might ask about how to sequence a lesson, how to incorporate different learning styles, or how to choose appropriate resources and materials to drive understanding. You may also be asked about scientific investigation and how to structure experiments that allow your students to form and test a hypothesis, and then work to validate through observation and empirical data. Next are questions around skill identification and development. These will have the most variance across individual Praxis Science exams depending on the grade level and specific area of science being covered, but ultimately focus on identifying and developing the foundational skills that students will need in order to successfully understand a given scientific concept. These questions may overlap with your content knowledge, as you may be asked to identify the key foundational skills needed for success. You should also have a clear understanding of how relevant skills relate to one another and ladder up to build understanding of more complex topics. For example, when approaching a scientific topic like gravity, you will want to first ensure that your students understand mass, acceleration, and Newton's laws of motion. You also may be asked to evaluate the usefulness of a given example for introducing or reinforcing a concept, and you should be familiar with writing scientific problems that fit a particular solution strategy or demonstrate a specific law. Next are questions that deal with identifying student strategies and errors. These questions will focus on identifying how a student is approaching a specific scientific concept or skill, and most commonly involve identifying why a student got a question wrong and then working with them to correct any mistakes. This includes being able to identify how a student's reasoning would replicate across similar questions and avoiding examples that would mask the error in the student's approach. For example, let's consider a lesson on solar energy. You invite your students to engage in a group discussion and ask them to identify some benefits and drawbacks of solar energy. One student asserts, solar energy is great because it is limitless. The sun is always there, so we can use as much energy as we want without ever running out. The student's reasoning is flawed because it assumes that the availability of sunlight equates to unlimited solar energy production. The student, however, has not taken into consideration the limitations of solar energy technology, including the efficiency of solar panels, the availability of sunlight depending on geographical location and time of day, and the need for energy storage for non-sunny periods. A good follow-up question would be, can we rely solely on solar energy for all of our power needs at any time and in any place? Why or why not? This question forces the student to consider the various factors that impact the efficiency and feasibility of solar energy production. It also invites the student to continue to take part in the discussion and identify the flaws in their reasoning themselves. A bad response would be to simply tell the student that they're wrong and then move on with the lesson without providing any further explanation. Finally, there are questions around evaluating student comprehension. These questions will focus on how best to assess a student's understanding and whether they have a strong grasp of a given scientific concept or need additional instruction. This may include questions about more formal assessment strategies, such as quizzes and tests, as well as more informal approaches, such as worksheets, classroom discussions, and group work. You should also be familiar with basic communication and feedback skills and ensure that you are familiar with how to provide constructive, specific, and timely feedback to your students to help them improve. So how should you study to ensure you are prepared for tasks of teaching questions come test date? The first and most important step is to learn about how these questions are typically structured and what they typically ask you about. Good news, you just did that. Next, you will want to go deeper into the specific scientific concepts covered on your exam code and make sure you understand them well enough to be able to explain them to someone else. And finally, you will want to practice. We are going to be publishing a number of practice problem walkthroughs that tackle tasks of teaching problems for each of the major Praxis science test codes, so make sure to stay tuned for those. And stick around, because right now, I'm going to give you my top 3 tips for answering any tasks of teaching science questions correctly. These tips won't be enough to get every problem right, but if you follow these, I guarantee that you can eliminate at least one bad answer choice on every tasks of teaching problem that you face. Tip 1. Be familiar with the fundamentals of sound experiment design. One of the most common tasks of teaching questions will ask you to create or evaluate an experiment that is intended to demonstrate a specific scientific concept or law. Experiments are a great way to get students engaged with the lesson and reinforce learning through real-life application. But they can also create confusing and contradictory results if not run properly. To begin, make sure that your experiment has a clear and testable hypothesis. You will then want to ensure that you are aware of all variables that could impact the results of your experiment and are controlling for all of them except for the specific one being tested. This ensures that any changes observed are due to the variable being tested and not some other factor. Finally, make sure that you are collecting data in an accurate, measurable, and consistent fashion. Quantitative data is always preferred over qualitative data, where individual subjectivity may come into play. And don't forget to incorporate statistical analysis to interpret the results and determine your confidence level. Tip 2, ensure that students are demonstrating proper scientific reasoning. As you review student work, remember that a proper scientific explanation is made up of 3 parts. First, there should be a claim. Second, there needs to be evidence provided that supports that claim. Third, and finally, there needs to be reasoning provided that reinforces how the evidence supports the claim. In addition to ensuring all 3 of these components are present, you should also be comfortable with evaluating student responses for their accuracy, precision, and consistency with broader scientific evidence. Tip 3, brush up on your scientific vocabulary. Remember that this is a written exam, and being able to remember specific scientific terms and their definitions on test day is just as important as being familiar with the broader concepts. Check out our channel for a full video that covers all the Praxis science terms you should know for test day. But for now, I will quiz you with some examples. What is the difference between a habitat and an ecosystem? What are the key components of an atomic structure? What does density measure? Knowing the definition of these common terms is critical to feeling confident and ready for your Praxis science exam. And there you have it. If you are looking for more Praxis test prep tips and techniques, check out our other videos, and don't forget to head over to study.com if you are interested in registering for one of our comprehensive Praxis test prep courses. Users who complete the course have a 92% pass rate on their Praxis exam, so definitely recommend checking that out if you are still feeling a bit unsure about your preparation for test day. Happy studying, and we'll see you in our next video.